3, if this is able to work. Yeah, YouTube is fucking confusing.
There's no one there. So.
Yeah, it says we're live.
Oh gosh. They both say live now. Fuck.
Oh, we got 6. Okay, we got 6. Black Power, Robert Diaz. Yay, we're back. Yo, can y'all hear us okay? Can you put yes in the chat if you hear us? Yeah, so it sounds much better. Audio is great. Perfect.
Okay, so that was my fault. My beats were still connected. And then apparently you can't just disconnect it and expect it to pick up the next audio feed. So yeah, fuck YouTube.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank y'all for joining us. My name is Ramiro Fúnez. I'm one of the co-editors of ANTICONQUISTA.
My name is Ofelia Carrillo. I'm also co-editor at ANTICONQUISTA. Thanks y'all for joining with us and your patience as we yet again struggle with YouTube.
Yeah, we're based out here in Los Angeles, California, and we are, as everyone else around the world, we're dealing with the impact of this COVID-19. And what's up, Caleb? Hello from New York. Shout out to Caleb. We always watch Caleb's streams, and thank you for supporting our stream, Caleb. Shout out to Robert Diaz. Shout out to Avant Australia. Eldon, I'm guessing from Bolivia. KJ. We're here talking about COVID-19, capitalism, socialism, and we want to talk about, tweeting it out, thank you, Caleb. We want to talk about why this situation, amid all of this chaos and crisis, why capitalism is no longer able to solve its own contradictions. Capitalism has proved to us through this situation that it is a failure. It cannot solve its own problems. It puts poor people at the chopping block in terms of suffering, and only socialism is the right path toward getting us out of this crisis. On ANTICONQUISTA, we talk a lot about socialism being the way out, socialism being constructive, which Caleb has also talked about. And this is what this crisis has shown us, is that it's like a blizzard outside in Minnesota from Eldon. Damn, that's crazy. Out here in Cali, it's a little cloudy, but it's still pretty hot. But yeah, we wanted to talk about that today because, you know, there's all these stories coming out about the coronavirus and COVID-19, and there hasn't really been much coverage about how socialism is really saving us from this because, and we'll go into some numbers in a little bit, Nicaragua are responding. And you look at in comparison to the capitalist countries, and it's just a total disaster. So we wanted to talk about that today with y'all for a little bit. What I wanted to also ask, where are y'all reaching us from? From Boston?
Boston, Minnesota. Like we said, we're out in LA, and so far, and I think obviously part of it has been the kind of social welfare state that's set up in California, but also like just like the geography. You can actually maintain 6 feet of distance between people no matter what you're doing in most places. Like if things are like really dense, stuff like that. But what's up? Welcome.
Greetings from Nicaragua.
Nicaragua's doing a great job also combating COVID-19. And yeah, I think it's a lot of these things are emblematic of capitalism. And I've seen a lot of the capitalism is the virus, like COVID-19 is like a symptom or something like that. And I think that that's really like a really pithy way to put basically like our perspective and most like leftist, Marxist-Leninist perspectives on the pandemic. And it's bringing to light a lot of contradictions that people have shied away from, that it's just no longer possible. And obviously we think that the ramifications of COVID-19, not only in the US, but as the empire kind of contracts and the economy contracts, and we're obviously in a recession, it's gonna have deep ramifications for the global South and the third world that even myself, like I'm thinking about like our family members and like the remittances that people send back to their home countries that are literally like a percentage of the GDP for like Honduras and Mexico, and because laborers here will send all that money back to their home countries as a way to like stabilize a lot of those fucking neoliberal states. But now it's like even my own uncles like aren't working anymore, so they're not sending money to my grandparents, and it's like all of these things that are just like building on top of each other. I think is like it's interesting to see, but it's obviously tragic in some ways, but it's in other ways, it's bringing to light a lot of things that makes me feel hopeful and optimistic, like in this crisis, that we'll come out of this, like, and I think Ramiro said this before the year started, in 2020, we'll come out more clairvoyant, with a better vision, with a better understanding of like.
Lucho in Mexico City, we should do a piece about remittances,
yeah.
And we should definitely do that, because a lot of, you look out here, for example, you see all the compas still out in the streets wearing masks, still working. The frontline people in the US are immigrants, undocumented folks, Black and brown communities. Our people are literally being pushed out and branded as essential workers, while all the bosses get to chill at home and give out orders from their comfort. Socialist countries that are building socialism have shown a model for what can be possible. And I kind of want to preface this conversation by saying that not all models of socialism are perfect. Not all models of socialism are alike. They're not exactly the way it was in the Soviet Union during the 1920s and 30s. And that's what we have to keep in mind, right? Because you're always going to find, especially online, especially in leftist circles, you're going to find the ultras who are like, that's not real socialism. You know, that's not, it's impure. You know, we're not evangelical Christians to be like, this is pure and not pure. Like, different countries are building socialism in their own way, the same way DPRK, China, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. And these are the countries that are leading the fight against COVID-19. And we can learn a lot from them. And I think it's really a huge embarrassment to US imperialism and Trump, because Trump kind of brands himself as the strong man, as someone who, you know, is going to take care of things and get things done. And he's failed to do that. Right now, the US is the epicenter of the COVID-19 crisis. I think the cases have, I think the curve has been met, has peaked out in like Italy and Spain. In the US, it's still hitting pretty bad for those of us who are in the US right now. Lucho says, here in Mexico, we've seen a lot of vultures who seem eager for AMLO to fail in order to score political points. It's gross. So far, Mexico's response has been correct. I think that's exactly right. AMLO is doing a great job. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like, for example, literally like on the remittances, like the elderly have gotten like additional, like direct cash aid, basically, like 10,000 pesos, I think is what my grandparents got. And now it's like, you know, people can breathe a little easier, even here, right? Because like all my family works in the restaurant industry. They're all service workers. They're all servers, cooks, line cooks, dishwashers. That industry like is shut down, you know, even though there's like takeout business and all that shit, like it's not matching what was the levels of consumption before the pandemic, which is also like speaks to like how our entire economy is like consumer based and like commodity based and whatever. Anyway, but you know, that helped a lot. That has helped. And my mom, like, I was shocked actually, because I'm always trying to get my mom like politicized. I'm always trying to get her to like watch stuff. And she started watching the matutinas, like the morning addresses that like AMLO does every morning. So it's interesting. Like it's people are becoming more engaged. And my mom will say things like, I'm gonna go watch my president. And she's talking about AMLO, not Trump, which is the first time I've ever heard her like willingly say those things. So I think it's like, it's also it's driving people to like come to more revolutionary conclusions and consciousness. And I think that's what for me is like, besides obviously all the pragmatic and practical and material things that we have to deal with right now that are shitty, like no one's negating like the loss of life or how fucked up the situation is, but there is like these silver linings. There are these like moments where I've kind of come to appreciate something like this. And we've said all the time, right? It's going to get much worse before it gets better. Yeah. And I think that's the situation we currently find ourselves in. And somebody was saying, I've heard people, yeah. And that's one thing I said to myself as soon as this happened. I'm like, all the Venezolanos that fled to Colombia are going to go back to Venezuela.
They are.
And they are, you know, and that had already been happening, period, right? Even before the pandemic, there was more Venezolanos migrating from Colombia back to Venezuela, right? Because of Duque's like fucking right-wing government and all these things that have happened since the FARC has demobilized. But obviously that was downplayed in the media. And maybe that's a good transition into getting into some of the like facts and figures of like what has happened in the past couple weeks.
Yeah, it's like Ofelia was saying, people are going back to Venezuela from Colombia. And you're seeing that even within Latin America, the countries that are building socialism, not only do they have some of the lowest rates, but they're actually handling it much better. For example, I just took a look at this morning some of the numbers. And for example, I want to do some comparisons, right, between countries with more or less similar populations. So for example, let's start off in the Caribbean, right? Cuba has about 11 million people, and the Dominican Republic has about 10 million people. So kind of more or less close population levels, right? In Cuba, there's only 16 reported deaths and 46 confirmed cases as of this morning, Sunday, April, whatever the fuck day it is.
The 12th.
The 12th. In the Dominican Republic, there's 135 reported deaths and 2,759 confirmed cases. So that is such a figure, a proportion that's so much higher. Right now, moving into Central America, Nicaragua has 1 reported death and 9 confirmed cases, and it has a population of about 6.4 million people. Panama, which has close to 5 million people, which is less than Nicaragua, has 79 reported deaths and over 3,000 confirmed cases.
In Venezuela, we've had 9 reported deaths, 175 confirmed cases, a population of about 29 million. In Peru, 181 reported deaths, 6,848 confirmed cases, and a population of 31 million. Socialism has helped like protect the people, and obviously like having healthcare, shutting down their borders early, taking preventative measures quickly. And I think something that came out of like China, the coverage that was rolling out of China, I remember like, well, in the Western media, of course, I'm not talking about like within China, but like the perception of how China was reacting in Wuhan to the COVID crisis. It was authoritarian, it was a dictatorship, it was, you know, all of these things, right? It was draconian, it was problematic, it was locking people up in their homes, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, no, obviously like centralized, decisive action by the CPC and the Chinese government, like is helping to save millions of lives. And why now it's evident to us whereas the US was taking these piecemeal actions, state by state, city by city, fucking county by county, which is absolutely ridiculous, to a global pandemic. In China, now you see we have about 3,400 deaths, 80,000 cases, whereas in the US, we have 20,000 fucking reported deaths and 500,000 confirmed cases.
It's insane. And Dono's asking, is there a website you're looking at? Yeah, there's 2 main sources that have up-to-date figures on the deaths. The first is the Washington Post mapping the coronavirus. They have a virtual map. Again, Washington Post is bourgeois media, but
the facts are the facts.
Facts are facts, right? For like objective numbers like that, I think it's a good source. The other source is the school based out of Baltimore, John Hopkins, that's keeping a death count.
Medical center.
And as KJ Mack was mentioning, Wuhan's beginning to open back up, and that's right. And that's because China has a centralized, organized system that's focused on the people's well-being. They literally use drone technology to bring goods and materials to families who are in need. And even like in Asia, for example, we can't also forget about Vietnam and DPRK. Vietnam is run by the Communist Party of Vietnam, and DPRK is run, or aka North Korea, is run by the Workers' Party of Korea. DPRK still has 0 reported deaths and 0 confirmed cases. And of course, mainstream media is like, is North Korea lying about their figures? And they're like, no, look, here's all our information. Like, we have 0 deaths.
And even if you think about it, like movement in and out of the DPRK is exceptionally limited, right? So why, why would you think that there's like all kinds of like flux of global travelers to the DPRK? There isn't. Like objectively, there fucking isn't. So it's interesting to see like the socialist countries that have done very well at controlling and containing COVID-19. All of a sudden, they're all liars. No one's telling the truth from us. Yeah. This is what we would advise you, like even Jack Ma, like who I disagree with, right? Like, ultra mega billionaire from China was like, here are some masks, here are some tests. Like, like the Chinese people like are doing all they can like to support the rest of the world, and it's interesting to see the mediatic campaign that is resurfacing all of this very like racist xenophobia, xenophobia against Asian folks. I mean, obviously in particular China, right? In the West, and it's really disgusting. And for one example I can give is everybody here was sharing on social media like how hard the Italian medical staff is working, and no doubt that they are, right? But when 2 months earlier we were seeing like Chinese workers in Wuhan like saying they were working 18-hour shifts and couldn't use the bathroom, everybody was like, oh, that's a lie. Oh no, like that's Chinese propaganda. Like how could you believe that? That's ridiculous, blah, 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 blah. But all of a sudden it's like a white Italian and they're worthy of humanity. They're worthy of life. They're worthy of—
Look at them singing from their balconies.
Yeah, which is like,
who gives a fuck? Like,
which was done in China as well, right? Like I'm adamant about stressing to people that all that shit was done in China before it happened in Italy, and like to respect like, you know, the Chinese people's work ethic and ability to share that knowledge with other people to make sure that, you know, our communities and families like are able to combat like COVID. But it's just like, it doesn't surprise me that this also comes on the tail end of like Trump's economic tariff war against China, the assault against Huawei, like all of these things that were just drumming up like this kind of racist, xenophobic, like problematic, like mediatic campaign against China in the months prior to this, right? If you were following the kind of coverage that mainstream media was doing about Huawei, about China, about the economic, you know, tariff back and forth that they were—
the Uyghurs,
like all of this, like—
I have with a lot of Maoists and anarchists. He says, with all due respect, do you believe China to be socialist? MLM here. I'm going to have to disagree with that for a lot of reasons.
But also, if that's the barometer, no one's socialist.
Right. It's,
you know what I mean? Like we're all working towards socialism, to building socialism, and objectively the countries that already have, like, are they able to reach like full socialism? No, you know, objectively they're not, but
they're building it.
And that's why we should always be like, you know, I think we try and be as flexible as possible because we're trying to build a new world parallel to the one that exists already, right? So that's kind of what
you start with practice. And even Mao himself, and this is the disagreement I have with so many Maoists, where like literally Mao Zedong would say like, oppose book worship, start with practice and then theory, start with the material world and then ideas. And the disagreement that we have with a lot of Maoists, and we love Mao, like I have a fucking Mao shirt right now, you know, and the thing is, if you study Mao, what he says, you start with the material world first, with reality first. And if you look at China, yeah, it's not perfect, right? But they're solving this global crisis literally at this moment because of China teaming up with Cuba, with DPRK to develop all this medicine, interferon alpha 2B, and all this other treatment that's being used all over, not the collective, has been failing. And I think that, you know, also Pradeep mentioned the same with Nepal, 9 confirmed cases, 0 critical condition. That's a tremendous accomplishment for Nepal as well, which is one of the poorest countries on the Asian continent and now has a unified communist party, but also of anarchists, because again, let's remember that a lot of anarchists and even Maoists are opposed to this idea of like centralized authority of a state taking power. And so, yeah, I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, but I mean, we could talk about that for like hours,
yeah.
And we'd never agree. So, I mean, not that we're not comrades because we disagree, you know, but
right.
I think someone has asked, will the U.S. move further to the left, or just say that, you know, we have a working class here that ultimately like is benefits directly from imperialism. So we would say like, no, like they're going to defend like every gain they have from exploiting the third world. Whereas others would say, well, no, we're going to pick up and lead global revolution in the U.S. We'll see. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't really have an answer for that. Like,
yeah, I think within the U.S., we also have to keep in mind that there is the diaspora of the global South that exists within the first world, and that's the frontline workers. Those are the people who are being hit hard right now in New York, for example. The hardest hit community has been Latinos. In states like Louisiana and Michigan, Black communities have been hit the hardest. And so I think we also have to make a distinction within the U.S. between white workers in like Montana, for example, who are moving in the opposite direction, where they're like arming up, they're reinforcing their feudal fascistic nature of getting like, you know, we're going to take our country back kind of thing, you know, and you have people from the global South, who immigrants in the U.S. who are suffering, and they're more wanting government support and intervention. So KJ was saying?
Well, and also, I mean, on that point, like it's also about like socialist creation and what, like, obviously, like Cuba in terms of world health just is amazing. What they can do under $1 billion blockade and what other countries like can't manage to do with all the funding and technology in the world is incredible. So, you know, Cuba obviously has the I'm gonna fuck this up. Interferon alpha 2b recombinant, which is, you know, a vaccine that has helped aid people in their recovery from COVID-19, which is being used in China. And then obviously there's Cuban doctors all over the world.
Shout out to Alex, by the way, Gatica. Hi, comrades. Pradeep was saying the state taking power in a situation like this is similar to what Engels said about the captain on a ship on authority. Look what Vietnam did. That's exactly right. As communists, as Marxist Leninists, and ourselves as third worldists, we understand that in the global South, you need a strong socialist leftist party to take control of the situation. And that's literally what the vanguard means, right? Or the vanguard of the people. You're showing them the way out. You're showing them optimism, construction, peace, health. You're not coming at them with pessimism. And I think that this has also shown that, you know, communism and the need for organization is still so needed, because within, I don't know about y'all, but I feel like within the last few years, this kind of postmodernist anarchist trend has become so popular, where it promotes decentralization, you know, a lack of authority, horizontalism, and all of these things that are ill prepared to handle any sort of crises like these.
And I also feel that the tendency for the left, or those going to the left here in the first world, is to think about things in a US context. So they think about, oh, centralized economy, you know, authoritarian action as like coming from like, you know, the US bourgeoisie and the US repressive police force and the US military, which is literally like the largest military in the world. Whereas when they see like, you know, China taking centralized action, they immediately equate like, oh, okay, like the US repressive state equals the Chinese state is also repressive. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's like the frame of mind that people are in, that like, oh, we can't defend any state, we can't defend any military, right? Like not understanding that when, you know, the vanguard, the working class, like has the power of the weapon, they have political power, and they're able to exercise their political will and create a dictatorship of the proletariat. And that's like what I struggle so much to explain to people, like China taking this type of action, Nicaragua taking this type of action, like is not the fucking same. Like not all like protests are revolutionary, right? Like somebody's mentioning Hong Kong, like exactly, like you have to take the context in mind, like who holds state power, like who holds control, like in Venezuela, right? Like the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias, you know, like they go out and instead of warmongering, like build homes and hospitals and interact with the community. That was something Chavez was adamant about gutting the fucking Venezuelan military, which had literally propped up Carlos Andrade Perez, like a horrible dictator for, you know, so long, who just black sites and murdered people. That's the military like Chavez came from, and was able to gut the institution and create something that serves the people. And I think that's what's like really hard for people to process and to understand. No, like turn your eyes to Venezuela and look what they're doing, like together with a centralized economy, with state planning, owning the national resources, right? Like, and some of the things particular to COVID-19, I think Ramiro pulled up some facts that Venezuela has been offering free flights home. Right, so like, you know, those who were in the U.S. were able to get a no-cost emergency flight from Miami to Caracas, whereas the U.S. shut down its borders and people were stuck in like Europe and Latin America or wherever they were, and they just had to figure that shit out. They were price gouged. They had to pay thousands of dollars to figure out how to get back home, because they might not be able to see their families if the country is borders are shut down for longer than we had expected, right? Like there were so many fucking op-eds and personal story pieces about you wanting to sympathize with the plight of these poor journalists or whoever the fuck they were, like running around the world, like trying to get back home. And it's like Venezuela's over here like, oh, word, you want to get home? Like, here's a flight. Come
from
home.
Miami to fucking Visítanos.
Come home, whatever, you know, like it was offered at no cost. And then obviously also instituted a shutdown immediately, like on March 12th, I think even before the city of LA, like instituted a shutdown, worldwide emergency, limited gatherings, obviously canceled flights from Europe, which should have been done. And now they think that a lot of the cases that were in the first case in New York was actually from Europe, right? So it was like, it's just interesting to see, like, and then what else? Oh, obviously they've distributed all the necessary personal protection equipment and supplies that people need, like face masks, and in Cuba as well, right? They were like immediately shifted manufacturing. They were like, okay, we don't need you to make pants. We need you to make masks. Go forth and make masks. You know, It was like, and then here you see like slowly these like huge private retailers trying to get some good PR, and when you don't have control over those key industries, like what happens in the rollout in response to a crisis, and why there's been, especially here, like you see like normal people wearing N95 masks that are not necessary for like ordinary people that should be safe for medical personnel, but because there's it's
no, like one dude with like fucking
it's anarchy. This is anarchy. You know what I mean? Like this is
anarchism.
Anarchy, like that's what we fucking have, right? And obviously, like in Venezuela, mobilizing health workers and what's the program called? It's called
Misión Barrio Adentro.
Misión Barrio Adentro. And then all the personal protection so that people can stay at home, just like in Wuhan. Like your rent payments are freeze. You're not going to get fired. We're going to deliver food to your homes. Like all the essential things. People need to have peace of mind to be able to stay home and really combat something like coronavirus. So it's been like a really extraordinary comparison, like just to see here, like people are still getting eviction threats in city of LA, I can say, at least. I don't know about elsewhere. People are still getting eviction threats. People are still still have this expectation that they need to pay rent, because every decree or rent moratorium that has been put out by LA County has been these vague words of like, okay, you can delay your payments for 6 months, but in the practicality, how they're implementing those things, like it's chaos. It's complete chaos. Like, you know, and undocumented people, like ICE raids have continued, deportations have continued. Like it's
fucking insane.
It's fucking madness. It's madness.
I just want to read off some of the comments. Dust James said lots of opportunity to organize in the lower strata of the working class and oppressed nations in the US with the quickly changing conditions. I totally agree. Yeah. And that's just something that a lot of first worldist communists don't get about third worldism, is that we do say that as third worldist communists, anti-colonial communists, there are global South people, diaspora, Asian people who are actually keeping this economy afloat. So I think that's a good point. KJ Mack said, I mean, even anarchist experiments were forced to have repressive state apparatuses in order to survive, whether they're militaries or anarchist, quote, horizontally organized people's militias. That's 100% true. And we saw that in the Spanish Civil War. You know, if it wasn't for the communists, there would have been more blood from anarchists. And you need structure, you need organization. And this idea of like, we're all just going to hold hands and burn sage and shit, like it just, it doesn't cut it. Our friend Jose Luis Granada Ceja said, I have an Ecuadorian friend who is still stuck in the US because Moreno doesn't give a shit about the people.
And what was lost there was, although they were able to gain and protect the subsidy on petroleum in the country, which is essential, Lenin was able to get away with a lot of cuts to public healthcare, with a lot of cuts to like public workers, like a lot of employment in Ecuador is like with the state, obviously, and different state industries and state institutions. And healthcare was one of the biggest ones that Lenin actually like led like thousands of cuts, whether it was less vacation time, less pay, or just like elimination of positions within the public healthcare system. And now you're seeing obviously the effects that had on the country, especially in Guayaquil, which is, even though Quito's the capital, Guayaquil is the most densely populated city in the country. So it's also within the context of how socialist nations have been so successful, we've also seen like the neoliberal right-wing states failing. I mean, which isn't surprising to us as well, but like in El Salvador, where
Nayib Bukele.
Bukele had promised, right, like these like these checks to people to sustain them through the crisis, and they show up to the bank the next day and no one could get the funds, and he's just over there stinging baby shark, apparently, situation in Honduras, but I think it's
horrible.
Like, it's also
people,
similar.
The thing too is that people forget is that, like, so right now, I've already heard 3 cases right now of reprisals by the US backed right-wing governments in Colombia, in Honduras, and Haiti. So in Haiti, Honduras, and Colombia, they're using the opportunity, the US-backed right-wing forces, to attack activists and leftists who have been critical of the governments. For example, in Haiti, the right-wing death squads supported by Jovenel Moise and the US-backed government have been targeting liberation theology socialists. And so just a few weeks ago, like 2 weeks ago, when this whole crisis was ramping up, there was one main activist out of Port-au-Prince, who his name is Pasha, who was actually, people came to his house at like the middle of the night, like a whole bunch of armed men, and he's paraplegic, he's on a wheelchair, and they try to kill him. Luckily, he was staying at a different house. But the fact that that group of 7 armed men with like big guns were allowed to travel the street in the middle of the night, even though there was already a curfew in place, shows that these attacks are being done with the complicity of police and the government, because they're not being, they're allowed to do that. Same in Honduras as well. There's been a lot of activists with Ofrané in the Garifuna community, and Copin, which is the Mayan Lenca community, who have been also getting death threats, and armed men visiting their house, same elements of leftist activists.
And it's obviously, we have our theories about where coronavirus, like this particular strain of coronavirus, originated, and I'm sure everybody on this chat has a theory about how the U.S. military like made it in a lab, and I'm sure we can have a good time like figuring that out. But I think what also has been frightening is that at this point, like COVID is a situation where you can literally say, oh yeah, that person had coronavirus, they died. People who have been dying, the elderly, those chronic conditions, homeless folks, like Black and brown folks, and it's like, this is like the kind of rants about epidemiology. But we were just thinking, like, this is like, it wouldn't surprise me if in a few decades we learned that this was a concerted and planned kind of situation or effort on behalf of like the U.S. military.
Shout out to René Moncayo from Chile. And that's right, those abuses are also going on in Chile right now, especially against the Mapuche people who have been leading the protests. Unfortunately, in Chile, a lot of the comfort of their apartments, where a lot of indigenous people from the south in Araucanía, who have been leading and at the forefront of these protests, are now leftist, anti-imperialist countries. They're responding with human-centered practice, medical service, medical care. And that just exemplifies the difference between capitalism and socialism, where capitalism puts profits before people and socialism puts people before profits. And it's as simple as that. It doesn't need to get more complex than that. People sometimes like to make socialism this abstract thing.
René said the rich get sick, don't respect the quarantine, and get the poor sick. That is fucking accurate. And I will say, at least in Los Angeles, of the times, this is all anecdotal, that I've gone out and seen, like, well, my neighborhood is primarily Chinese and Latino. So it's everyone's wearing their face masks, people are keeping their distance, being respectful as possible. And I will say, like, in more affluent sides of the city, like, people have complained that people have not observed the quarantine. It's crazy. Like, it's and then once, poor Black and brown people get sick and they show up at a hospital, they're not going to get the same treatment as other people. And that's already been proven. Like, even in LA County, infection rates for African Americans, for Black folks, like, are not any higher than any other ethnic subgroup, but they're dying. They're dying more than other groups. And it's like, yeah, like, when you put together a pandemic, an overwhelmed medical system, plus capitalism and racism, already, like, Black folks don't get the medical treatment that they need when they go into a medical center. Like, this has been proven, like, psychologically, that, healthcare providers are less likely to believe Black women and men, or Black folks in general, when they talk about pain, when they talk about feeling ill, when they talk about, like, any symptoms and things like that. So it like, not at all surprising when I started hearing that more Black folks in LA County were dying at a rate that was not equivalent to their, like, infections and the recovery rates that we've seen worldwide. So and I can imagine it's very similar in, like, Black majority cities and other parts of the country that it's more evident, because obviously, we're in LA, so it's predominantly Latino and the whole state.
Shout out to Lawrence Chu. I'm here because of Caleb, and shout out to Caleb. He's a good friend of ours. Thank you for sharing the link. Please share the link if you haven't already, or you just direct people to youtube.com/ANTICONQUISTA. We're talking about socialism versus COVID-19, why capitalism fucking sucks, and why it cannot handle this crisis, why socialism is the only way out of situations like this. And also another message from our homie, Jose Luis Granado Ceja. From what I've read, in Ecuador, they suspect that the virus broke out as a result of rich kids returning from studying in Europe and then attending weddings. After that, it spread to poor communities. Yeah, I would not be surprised at all. And especially in Ecuador, the fucking right-wingers, the pelucones, how Correa used to call them, they just have no sense of no sense of collectivism. And I think it also goes down to psychology as well, because a lot of psychological myths have been broken because of this crisis. The idea that the individual comes before the collective, I think that idea is slowly dying because of this crisis, because you need collective action. And that's what Marx talks about in Marxist philosophy, that humans are social beings. Above anything else, humans are social beings. We evolved because of social formation. Even the way in which we evolved into tribes, into nations, and now into one larger international totality, we are social beings, and we're not gonna solve problems by individualistic actions. And I think that's what's interesting about this whole situation, is that this whole notion that the free market, the invisible hand of the market is going to solve problems, or individual actions are going to solve problems, is that veil is being lifted up.
And I think also anecdotally, like other examples, because I'm obviously reading more local news, like things about LA City and LA County and like things we need to be doing, but for pragmatic reasons. But there was a story that came out like about a week ago that said poorer communities in LA City aren't being as impacted by COVID-19 as the West Side. So the West Side is basically whiter, and wealthier, near the beach, near the coast. The East Side, the South Side, they're more inland. And people were they couldn't understand, like, why is it that these communities are being impacted less, right? Like being impacted in a I don't know what the statistics are at now, because it might have changed, but it was just this idea of the communal as well. Like, even though obviously we're in the first world and you start losing a lot of those like habits and tendencies, but like our societies like have been communal for a long time, and obviously like bourgeois society has pushed us and tried to make us stray from that as much as humanly possible. But at least in LA, I would say for a lot of groups that are still like first generation, like working class, like immigrant communities, like that has been very much like I've seen like the ramifications of that. Like, you've seen it's true or not. But it's different, right? Because in New York, obviously, like the Bronx and Queens, which is all immigrant and all working class, have been way more impacted. Most of them work like in public transportation, hospitals, things like that. And here, like a lot of folks, like a myriad of different kinds of jobs, right? But also like the spatial kind of thing that you can have here. When you control for that factor, then here it's like people are doing better. So it's just like trying to make sense of it all also has been a process.
Shout out to Gigi Lopez, Black Hammer. Shout out to Ghazi. Shout out to Black Hammer. Shout out to Rob. Shout out to Hood Communists. Make sure to support those sites as well. They're doing some really great work. Non-paid, pure for the love of the people. So make sure to support them.
Someone asked us if we know more sites. I don't know if folks can add in the chat like more groups that do similar streams about Latin America and the third world, something like that, the global South. This is why we started ANTICONQUISTA, because we didn't think like that perspective existed. And if it existed, it wasn't coming from Latin Americans, it wasn't coming from Latinos, it wasn't, and we could go on for days about when and how we learned that. But if you've seen other lives of ours about our origin story, or maybe we should do one just on like why we started ANTICONQUISTA. And we do plan to do more lives, so just let us know how much y'all would like us to do next. We thought this was like a timely and kind of relevant way to connect with folks on ANTICONQUISTA, and this is what drives us. You know, it's not my 9 to 5. It's not Ramiro's 9 to 5. Certainly, it's like connecting with fellow and like-minded folks who you know really want to change.
And Skeptical Mantis was asking, have you ever heard of street epistemology? I haven't, but it sounds interesting. And also asked about Black Against Empire.
Wait, there was another one. Go up. How do you stay afloat so much and know so much about Latin
America?
I would love to level up my knowledge. Honestly, I didn't even want to do this live before we started. I told Ramiro because I felt self-conscious that I hadn't done enough research. And I think that's the biggest thing that holds us back, I would say, as people of color, as leftists, like, oh, I don't know enough, right? Whereas the right wing will just get on a fucking live stream and talk out their ass. We need to take our
country back.
And, you know, and just like, and say nonsense and then gain a following, right? And they have no fear of like making mistakes. They have no fear of going public with something. I think, you know, just fuck it, just do it. Like, just do it. Just, you know, start your ANTICONQUISTA, like start, you know, culture. And that's like kind of where I go towards, and health. And Ramiro, you know, is interested in another thing, and he goes down his own avenue about specific countries. And we have our own strengths, you know, like he focuses on one thing, I focus on another thing. So yeah, just, you know, I think learn a little bit every day. I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, just having
don't overwhelm yourself. Because there's no way we don't keep up with everything.
Yeah.
Not at all, you know?
And in the same way that COVID-19 has exposed the interconnectedness and interdependence of our economic and political system, how everything affects each other, we should also have the same view of Latin America and the Caribbean in the sense of historical understanding, because different events and different people have interconnected. Because one of the issues within Latin America and the Caribbean, two of the biggest issues have been the imposition of religion and the imposition of nationalism. And those two have been used to divide our people and see ourselves within the unit of the nation state, where it's just like, okay, I'm from, you know, Brazil, so I'm only gonna know about Brazil, only gonna understand how it affects Brazil. But wait a second, the Portuguese efforts that were going on in Brazil also affected Angola. They also affected Mozambique. They're interconnected. And so the same way that COVID-19 and this crisis has exposed the need for us to view things in a systemic, interconnected way of processes, we have to have the same approach with the news and history as we speak. For example, in Latin America, right now, Nicaragua has been able to keep a low death count because it's been getting help from Cuba and Venezuela, right? Same thing with Venezuela.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if y'all have any other questions or anything else to add, or just like generally. I think that's kind of what we had to share, and we really hope we want to do more lives. So yeah, let us know like what you're interested in learning and doing lives about.
Where are y'all watching us from, by the way? If you want to put in the chat. Centralized planning, sorry, anarchistas.
I think Ramiro could take that one on. He's really he. Well, another thing, right? Like study, right? But we also have like backgrounds. Like my degree is in Latin American history. You know, like I spent 4 years reading about Latin America, so I have that privilege. You know, it's also like I think like study as much as you can, and also recognize that there are some people who have like studied this. Like they, you know, Ramiro has studied political economy. Like when he talks about like breaking down dialectical materialism and a lot of the pieces you see on ANTICONQUISTA, like that's like his labor, that's his work, that's his intellectual work as well. So I think we've also like been privileged like to be able to make that our life's work. He's a journalist, you know, I work for a labor union. Like we are also able to, within the context of our daily lives, keep up. So if like you have a separate 9 to 5 that like doesn't allow you to do anything during the workday that has to do with your other interests, like, yeah, just take it day by day, I would say. And shout out to everyone joining us. Brooklyn,
Caleb,
so Charlotte, Puerto Rico, Las Vegas. Las Vegas. I love Vegas. Albany, Texas, Bay Area, Santiago.
Yeah, Puerto Rico, Melanie Rodriguez, thank you for mentioning
Minneapolis,
that. I'm concerned about Puerto Rico right now. I'm sure they're getting fucking no help right now. And because of the Jones Act, all commerce has to go to the US first, you know? And it's just like...
Yeah, and they were obligating Puerto Rico to take like these fucking, the cruise. You know, Puerto Rico has been so adversely impacted and with its infrastructure completely demolished. And then now you talk about like coronavirus hitting it, and it's...
Yeah,
you know, it's
insane. But yeah, thank you all for joining us. I think we're gonna wrap up. Bondan says PR was suffering from the earthquakes.
Yeah, from the earthquakes.
Before this started. Detroit checking in. Andres says they are a colony with a colonial power that is so incompetent and indifferent towards them. And by the way, Andres Lopez, I like your Macheteros logo. We definitely support
that's pretty sweet.
The Machetero movement in Puerto Rico, the revolutionary anti-imperialist movement in Puerto Rico. Same in Chile says René Moncayo. It's the Bolsonaro Piñera Trump three-head. I literally pictured like a three-headed monster with their ugly ass faces going like.
And it's crazy, it's crazy. And then in Brazil, the situation, oh dear Lord, it's another almost ethnic cleansing. There's no other way to describe it. If you're not giving people and obviously Black people and indigenous people in Brazil, which are the most vulnerable and marginalized and the majority of the population in the country, the resources they need to be able to shelter in place. You have people who are like, what am I going to do? If I can't work, what do you want me to do? I don't have anything else to sustain me, to support me, the lumpen proletariat, which we know in Latin America and the Caribbean and just the global South generally, right, is most of our people. It's
insane. The same with Janine Añez in Bolivia. Yeah, it's fucking insane right now. All the indigenous people,
and they're getting away with so much in Bolivia right now. It's incredible. It's incredible. There was already mass repression right after October, but it's just escalated so much because the international kind of eye has been taken off of Bolivia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But thank you all for joining us, and make sure to, even if you don't share the link, share the message of the stream, which is again that socialism is the only way out of this. Capitalism to your relatives, because this is the only way out of it. Collective human brilliance, and that's the way we've gotten out of other situations in the past as human beings. We need to keep evolving, and so socialism is the way out. Collective, when people come together, we can unleash so much. And that's really the main message of this stream, is come together, help each other out. If you know people who are suffering right now, help them out. If you're in a position where you can help others, please.
$500 a year. Everything else is done completely voluntarily and on our free time. And everything else we take from our Patreon and our funds. We decide and pick a group basically every quarter or so to send the funds to. And if you want to know more, just let us know, and we can chat offline about it. Somebody said, my comrade said the rate at which unarmed Black men are killed by cops and homophobic, transphobic violence as well is alarmingly high in Brazil, much like it is in Mexico as well. But also it's when you factor in also the population size, it's still really high, given the size of the country. Thanks so much, comrades. Please, if you're interested in collabing with us, getting on a live together, an Instagram live, an interview, whatever, we're totally open to working with anyone. We can take care of yourselves.
Street epistemology.